I never thought I'd find love again at 54, much less in a dimly lit gallery surrounded by pretentious art snobs, but there. I was Lydia Campbell, renowned translator and reluctant socialite, nursing a lukewarm glass of chard and desperately seeking. A.N. escape route Lydia, darling my colleague. Martha's shrill voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. You simply must meet. Charles, he's a widower, and quite the catch. I suppressed a groan. This was precisely why I'd been avoiding Mies. Events ever since my divorce, well-meaning friends had taken it upon themselves to play matchmaker. If only they knew the truth, perhaps later. I said with a tight smile, ducking behind a particular large sculpture. That's when I sought a photograph that seemed to reach into my very soul. It was a black and white image of a woman standing alone on a windswept cliff, her back to the camera. The loneliness, the yearning, it was all there, captured in shades of gray. I stepped closer, mesmerized. My hand reached out almost of its own accord to touch the catalog lying on a nearby pedestal, and that's when it happened. Our fingers brushed just for a moment, and I felt a jolt of electricity course through me. I looked up startled and found myself staring into the most captivating green eyes I'd ever seen. She was younger than me, early 30s perhaps, with tousled blonde hair and a face that spoke of quiet intensity for a long moment. We just stood there, connected by that simple touch, and the power of the image before us. It's remarkable, isn't it? I finally managed to say my voice. Barely above a whisper, she nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Then, to my surprise, she pulled out a small notepad and scribbled something. Before handing it to Meth, solitude speaks volumes, it read. I looked back at her, intrigued. Are you? She tapped her throat and shook her head slightly, then wrote again. Bailey Perry, the photographer. My eyes widened. You created this. It's extraordinary. The way you've captured the emotion, the longing. Bailey's smile grew, lighting up her entire face. She gestured towards the exit with a questioning look. I glanced back at the crowded gallery, at Martha's searching gaze, and made a decision that would change my life forever. Yes, I said, surprising myself with the eagerness of my voice. Let's get out of here. We slipped out into the cool night air, leaving behind the noise and pretension. As we walked side by side down the quiet street, I felt a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in years. And Lydia, by the way, I said, breaking the comfortable silence. Lydia Campbell, I'm a translator. Bailey's eyes lit up with interest. She pulled out her notepad again. How many languages? I couldn't help but laugh. Oh, darling, you don't want to get me started on that. Let's just say I've never met a language I didn't want to learn. She grinned, a mischievous glint in her eye, and wrote challenge. Accepted. We ended up in a tiny hole in the wall cafe, the kind of place I would have never frequented in my carefully curated life. But as I watched Bailey's expressive hands dance through the air, telling stories without words, I realized I'd been missing out on so much. Hours passed, like minutes. We communicated through a mix of writing gestures and the occasional burst of laughter. I found myself opening up about my failed marriage, my struggles with the expectations placed on women my age. Bailey listened with those intense green eyes, offering silent support and understanding. As the cafe owner finally shooed us out at closing time, I felt a pang of regret. I didn't want this night to end. Bailey must have sensed my hesitation. She took my hand, gosh, her touch was electric, and led me to a nearby park. We sat on a bench, gazing up at the stars, our shoulders just barely touching. I turned to look at her profile, illuminated by the soft glow of the streetlights. Bailey, I said softly, I don't know what this is, but I'd like to see you again. She met my gaze, her eyes full of warmth and something more. Slowly, deliberately, she leaned in mine. My heart raced as her lips brushed against mine, soft and sweet and full of promise. As I melted into that kiss, I knew my life would never be the same over. The next few weeks, Bailey and I fell into a rhythm, as natural as breathing. We'd meet at her studio, a converted warehouse space filled with the smell of developing chemicals and the quiet hum of creativity. I'd watch her work, mesmerized by the bimeli way she coaxed beauty from shadows and light one evening as the sun dipped low over Stockton's skyline Bailey showed me her latest project, a photography book, exploring urban isolation. Her images were haunting, each one telling a story of loneliness. Amidst the crowd, these are incredible, I murmured, flipping through the pages. Have you thought about publishing internationally? Bailey's brow furrowed, and she shook her head, scribbling quickly. Language barrier, too expensive. I felt a surge of excitement. What if I translated it for you into French, German, Spanish, any language? You want her eyes widened, a mix of surprise and hope flashing across her face. She hesitated, then wrote, You do that, of course, I replied, trying to keep my voice casual. Even as my heart raced, it would be my pleasure, and so began our late-night working sessions. We'd hunker down in my apartment, surrounded by dictionaries and coffee. Mugs by Bill's photographs spread out before us. I'd wrestle with capturing the nuance of her imagery and words, while she'd communicate through a mix of gestures, expressions, and the occasional hastily scrawled note. It was during these nights that I truly began to understand the depth of Bailey's talent and the complexity of her soul. Her silence wasn't a barrier, it was a canvas on which she painted her most profound thoughts. One night, as I struggled to translate a particularly poignant image, I felt Bailey's hand on my shoulder. I looked up, startled by the intensity, and her green eyes slowly, deliberately, she leaned in, her lips just inches from mine. The shrill ring of my phone shattered the moment. I jerked back, flustered, and answered without checking the caller ID. Lydia, darling, Martha's voice chirped. I've set you up on a date with the most eligible bachelor in Stockton. You can thank me later. I ended the call quickly, my cheeks burning. When I turned back to Bailey, her expression was unreadable. She gestured towards the door, signaling it was time for her to leave. Bailey, wait, I called. But she was already gone, the echo of the closing door hanging in the air. The next day, I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the ache in my chest. I was in the middle of a particularly tricky translation when my boss, Richard, called me into his office. Lydia, we've got a situation, he said, his face grave. There's a hostile takeover attempt. They're targeting our LGBTQ plus inclusive policies. My blood ran cold. Our agency had been at the forefront of promoting diversity in the translation industry. What can we do? Richard sighed heavily. There might be a way, but you're not going to like it. He explained the plan of strategic marriage to consolidate company shares. My mind read, you want me to marry some man I've never met to protect the company? I know it's a lot to ask, Richard said softly, but think of all the people we could help, the voices we could amplify. I left his office in a daze, my thoughts a jumbled mess that evening as I stared at Bailey's photographs, trying to find the right words. I realized I was losing myself in translation, not just of language, but of my own heart days. Passed in a blur of meetings and legal consultations, I tried to reach out to Bailey to explain, but she seemed to have vanished. Her silence, once a source of intrigue, now felt like a wall between us. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, I ducked into a small coffee shop to escape the downpour, and there she was, hunched over her camera at a corner table. Our eyes met, and the world seemed to stop. I moved towards her, my heart pounding. Bailey, but before I could finish, she stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, the look in her eyes, hurt, betrayal, and something else I couldn't quite name, hit me like a physical blow. Please, I whispered, reaching for her hand. Let me explain for a moment. I thought she would pull away, but then with a barely perceptible nod, she allowed me to lead her outside. We stood under the awning, the rain creating a curtain around us. Words tumbled out of me about the company, the takeover, the impossible choice. I was facing Bailey, listened, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she looked at me for a long moment, then with a gentleness that broke my heart, she cued my face in her hands and kissed me. It wasn't a soft kiss, it was fierce and desperate, filled with all the words she couldn't say. I kissed her back with equal fervor, pouring every ounce of my confusion and longing into it. When we finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, I knew I could never go through with the sham engagement, whatever the cost. I had to follow my heart. Bailey's lips curved into a small smile. She pulled out her ever-present notepad and wrote 3 words that changed everything. Let's fight together. As we walked hand in hand through the rain-soaked streets, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. The road ahead would be challenging, but with Bailey by my side, I was ready to face whatever came our way. The next morning, I strode into Richard's office with a newfound determination. I can't do it, I announced, my voice steady despite the nervous flutter in my stomach. I won't go through with this fake engagement, Richards. Face fell, a mix of disappointment and understanding. Lydia, I respect your decision, but you have to understand the gravity of the situation. Without this merger, we might lose everything we've worked for. I took a deep breath, steeling myself then. We'll find another way. I can't compromise who I am, not even for the company. As I turned to leave, Richard called out, wait, there might be another option, but it's risky. He outlined a plan that made my head spin. A prominent male executive sympathetic to our cause would publicly announce our engagement. Meanwhile, I'd work behind the scenes to rally support and expose the hostile takeover's true motives. It's not ideal, Richard admitted, but it buys us time without requiring you to actually marry anyone. I left his office with a heavy heart, torn between my principles and the practical reality of our situation. That evening, as Bailey and I huddled in her dark room, the red light casting everything in a surreal glow, I explained the new plan. Her fingers flew across her notepad. Are you sure about this? I sighed, leaning into her warmth. No, but I don't see another choice, at least this way. I'm not actually tying myself to anyone. Bailey's eyes clouded with concern, but she nodded her hand. Finding mine in the dim light, we stayed like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other's presence. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of secret meetings and carefully orchestrated public appearances. I plastered on a smile for the cameras, playing the part of the blushing bride-to-be, while my fiancé, a kind but nervous man named David, fumbled through his lines behind the scenes. Bailey threw herself into her work with a fervor that both impressed and worried me. She took on increasingly dangerous assignments, capturing images of social unrest and environmental destruction that left me in awe of her talent and terrified for her safety. One night, as I pored over legal documents in my apartment, my phone buzzed with a news alert. My blood ran cold as I read the headline, local photographer injured in protest clash. I called Bailey's emergency contact, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Hours passed in an agonizing blur of hospital waiting rooms and tour updates from doctors. When I was finally allowed to see her, my heart broke at the sight of her battered form, her arm in a cast, and her face mottled with bruises. Her eyes fluttered open as I approached, and she managed a weak smile. I collapsed into the chair beside her bed, tears streaming down my face. Gosh, Bailey, what were you thinking? She fumbled for her notepad, wincing with the effort. Had to tell the truth like you. I clasped her good hand in mine, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. We'll find another way. Promise me you won't take risks like that again. Bailey's gaze was intense, even through the haze of pain medication. She nodded slowly, then scribbled another note. Stay with me. I kicked off my shoes and carefully climbed onto the narrow hospital bed, mindful of her injuries. As I held her, listening to the steady beep of the monitors, I realized how close I'd come to losing her, to losing us. The next morning, I awoke to find David standing in the doorway, his expression a mix of surprise and understanding. So this is why, he said softly. I extricated myself from Bailey's embrace, my cheeks burning. David, he held up a hand, cutting me off. No need to explain. I always suspected there was more to this arrangement. His eyes softened as he looked at Bailey's sleeping form. She's the real reason you agreed to this charade, isn't she? I nodded, tears pricking at my eyes. I thought I was protecting her, protecting us all. But I can't do this anymore, David surprised me by pulling me into a gentle hug. Then let's end it on our terms over the next few days. As Bailey recovered, David and I hatched a plan. We'd use the media attention from our engagement to shine a light on the hostile takeover's true agenda. It was risky, but with Bailey's photographs as evidence and my linguistic skills to craft the message, we stood a fighting chance. The day of the big reveal arrived all too soon. I stood backstage at the press conference, my heart pounding, Bailey squeezed. My hand her presence, a steadying force, as I stepped up to the podium facing a sea of flashing cameras and expectant faces. I took a deep breath, ladies and gentlemen. I began, my voice stronger than I felt. I have a confession to make. The room fell silent as I laid bare the truth about the takeover attempt, about the fake engagement, about the real love I'd found amidst the chaos. I spoke of diversity, of authenticity, of the power of words and images to change hearts and minds. When I finished, the silence stretched for an agonizing moment. Then, from the back of the room, a lone voice called out, "Thank you for your courage." It was as if a dam had broken. Suddenly, reporters were clamoring for more details. All eyes were stepping forward to offer support, and social media was exploding with messages of solidarity. In the chaos that followed, I found Bailey's eyes in the crowd. She beamed at me, her face radiant with pride and love as we embraced, heedless of the cameras capturing the moment. I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together. Our love no longer lost in translation, but shouted from the rooftops for all the world to hear. The aftermath of the press conference was a maelstrom of media frenzy and corporate chaos. Our phones buzzed incessantly with calls from journalists, activists, and industry insiders. While the public response was overwhelmingly supportive, the company's board was in uproar. I sat in my apartment, nursing a glass of wine and scrolling through the flood of messages when Bailey burst through the door. Her eyes were wild, her hair windswept. She thrust her phone into my hands. A news article displayed on the screen, renowned photographer takes on dangerous assignment in war-torn region. The headline blared. My stomach dropped. "Bailey, no, you can't be serious." She snatched back her phone, fingers flying across the keypad. "This is my chance to make a real difference, to show the world what's happening." I felt a surge of anger tinged with fear. "And what about us? What about everything we've just risked?" Bailey's expression softened. She cued my face in her hands, her touch gentle but insistent. Then she stepped back and signed slowly and deliberately. "So I could understand. I have to do this for us, for everyone who's ever felt silence." I wanted to argue, to beg her to stay, but I recognized the determination in her eyes. It was the same fire that had drawn me to her in the first place. "Promise me you'll be careful," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. She nodded, pulling me into a fierce embrace as we stood there clinging to each other. I tried to memorize every detail: the scent of her hair, the warmth of her skin, the steady beat of her heart against mine. The next morning, I watched as Bailey's taxi disappeared around the corner, taking a piece of my heart with it. The days that followed were a blur of board meetings, legal consultations, and sleepless nights. I threw myself into damage control at the company, fighting tooth and nail to preserve our inclusive policies. But in the quiet moments, when the world slowed down, all I could think about was Bailey out there in the dangerous unknown. Weeks passed with only sporadic communication. A hastily typed email here, a blurry video call there. Each time I saw her face on the screen, looking more haggard, and haunted my worry deepened than one crisp autumn morning. I received a package. Inside was a memory card and a note in Bailey's messy scroll: "The truth. Be careful." With trembling hands, I uploaded the contents to my computer. What I saw took my breath away. Bailey had captured images of unspeakable atrocities, but also moments of incredible humanity and resilience. Her photographs told stories that no words could adequately convey. As I pored over the images, my phone rang. It was Richard, his voice tight with tension. "Lydia, we've got a problem. The board is pushing for a vote on the takeover. We need something big to sway them." I looked at the screen, at Bailey's powerful images. I think I might have just the thing. The next day, I strode into the boardroom, my head held high as the members settled into their seats, eyeing me with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. I connected my laptop to the projector. "Before we vote," I said, my voice steady, "I'd Like you all to see something, the room fell silent as Bailey's photographs filled the screen. I narrated each image, using every ounce of my linguistic skill to bring the stories to life. By the time I finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. This, I said softly, is why our work matters. This is why we fight for inclusivity, for giving voice to the voiceless. The vote that followed was unanimous, the takeover was rejected, and our inclusive policies were not only preserved but strengthened. As the board members filed out, offering congratulations and apologies in equal measure, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We'd done it. My elation was short-lived, however. That evening, as I was about to leave the office, my phone buzzed with a news alert that made my blood run cold. Journalist and photographer missing in conflict zone. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I stumbled to my desk, frantically dialing numbers, calling in every favor I could think of. Hours passed in a haze of fear and desperate hope. Just before dawn, as I was pacing my living room for the thousandth time, there was a knock at the door. I flung it open, my heart in my throat. There stood Bailey, battered and exhausted, but alive. Her clothes were torn, her camera hanging limply around her neck, but her eyes, those beautiful green eyes, were as fierce and determined as ever. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the air electric between us. Then, as if a dam had broken, we collided. Our lips met in a kiss that was part desperation, part relief, and all-consuming passion. When we finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, I pressed my forehead to hers. "Don't you ever scare me like that again," I whispered. Bailey's lips curved into a small smile. She reached for her ever-present notepad, but I stopped her hand. "No," I said softly. "Show me understanding," dawned in her eyes. Slowly, reverently, she began to sign, her graceful hands painting a story of danger, courage, and homecoming. As I watched her, my heart swelling with love and pride, I realized that our journey was far from over, but whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, two women bound by love and a shared commitment to truth, ready to take on the world. The weeks following Bailey's return were a whirlwind of emotion and activity. As she recovered from her ordeal, I found myself torn between relief at having her safe and an almost overwhelming desire to shield her from the world. But Bailey, true to form, was already planning her next project. One evening, as we sat curled together on my couch, she showed me her idea: an exhibition of intimate portraits exploring themes of identity, love, and resilience. "It's beautiful," I murmured, flipping through her sketches. Then I noticed something that made my breath catch. "Bailey, is this us?" She nodded, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. The image was striking, the two of us, foreheads touching, eyes closed, our hands entwined between us. It was achingly vulnerable, radiating a love so palpable it seemed to leap off the page. I felt tears prick my eyes. "Are you sure you want to share this with everything that's happened?" Bailey's gaze was steady as she signed, "No more hiding. This is who we are." I kissed her, then pouring all my love, and admiration into the gesture. As we broke apart, I whispered, "Okay, let's do it." The next few months were a frenzy of preparation. Bailey threw herself into her work with renewed passion while I juggled my translation responsibilities. With helping her organize the exhibition, it was exhausting, exhilarating work. Finally, opening night arrived. The gallery buzzed with anticipation as the city's art elite mingled with activists, journalists, and curious onlookers. Bailey, resplendent in a tailored suit that set off her blonde hair, moved through the crowd with quiet confidence. I watched her from across the room, my heart swelling with pride. She caught my eye and winked, sending a flutter through my stomach. Even after all this time, she still had the power to make me feel like a love-struck teenager. As the exhibition officially opened, a hush fell over the crowd. Bailey's photographs were arresting, raw, honest portraits that seemed to capture the very essence of her subjects. There were images of same-sex couples, trans individuals, people of all ages and backgrounds, each radiating strength and vulnerability in equal measure. And then the center of it all was us. The photograph was even more powerful in large format, our love laid bare for all to see. I felt a hand on my arm and turned to find Martha, my old colleague, staring at the image with wide eyes. Lydia, she breathed, is that really you? I squared my shoulders, ready for judgment or disapproval, but to my surprise, Martha's face broke into a warm smile. You look happy, truly happy. Tears pricked my eyes as I nodded. I am. As the night wore on, I was overwhelmed by the positive responses. People approached me sharing their own stories, thanking us for our bravery. It felt like a watershed moment, not just for Bailey and me, but for our entire community. Later, as the last guests trickled out, Bailey and I found ourselves alone in the gallery. We stood hand in hand before our portrait, the silence heavy with emotion. We did it, I murmured, squeezing her hand. Bailey turned to me, her green eyes shining with unshed tears. Slowly, deliberately, she signed, I love you, my heart. Sword, it was the first time she'd signed those words to me. I cued her face in my hands, my thumbs gently brushing away the tears that had begun to fall. I love you too. I whispered so damn much, our lips met in a kiss that was soft and sweet, full of promise and shared dreams. As we melted into each other, I felt a sense of rightness, of coming home. The spell was broken by the shrill ring of my phone. I groaned reluctantly, pulling away to answer it. Lydia Campbell speaking. Miss Campbell, a stern voice replied, this is Gerald Hawthorne from the board of directors. We need to discuss your situation. My blood ran cold in the euphoria of the exhibition's success. I'd almost forgotten about the potential backlash at work. Of course, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. When would you like to meet? Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp, he replied curtly before hanging up. I turned to Bailey. My anxiety must have been written all over my face because she immediately pulled me into a comforting embrace. They want to meet tomorrow, I mumbled into her shoulder. Gosh, what if they fire me? What if all of this was for nothing? Bailey gently pushed me back, her hands moving in a flurry of signs. It wasn't for nothing. We showed the world who we are. Whatever happens, we face it together. I took a deep breath, drawing strength from her unwavering support. You're right. We've come too far to back down. Now we spent the rest of the night in Bailey's dark room, seeking solace in the familiar rituals of development. As we worked side by side, stealing kisses in the red-tinged darkness, I felt my resolve strengthen. The next morning, I strode into the boardroom with my head held high. The room fell silent as I took my seat, every eye trained on me. Gerald Hawthorne cleared his throat. Miss Campbell, it has come to our attention that you've been involved in some rather controversial activities. I met his gaze steadily. If by controversial you mean living authentically and standing up for marginalized voices, then yes, I have. A murmur ran through the room. I braced myself for the worst, but then something unexpected happened. Sarah Chun, one of our younger board members, spoke up. I, for one, think it's admirable, she said firmly. Lydia's actions have brought positive attention to our company. We should be celebrating this, not condemning it. What followed was a heated debate that lasted for hours. By the time it was over, I was emotionally drained, but victorious. Not only had I kept my job, but the board had agreed to implement new diversity initiatives inspired by Bailey's exhibition as Belfish. I left the office that evening. My phone buzzed with a text from Bailey. How did it go? I smiled, my heart light with relief and love. We won. I typed back, come over. I think this calls for a celebration. Later that night, as Bailey and I lay tangled together in my bed, our bodies still humming from our passionate reunion, I marveled at how far we'd come from that first chance meeting in an art gallery to this moment of triumph. We'd faced every challenge head on, our love only growing stronger in the face of adversity. As I drifted off to sleep, Bailey's warmth, a comforting presence beside me, I knew that whatever the future held, we were ready to face it together. The aftermath of Bailey's exhibition and my boardroom victory brought a whirlwind of change. Suddenly, we were thrust into the spotlight as unexpected icons of the LGBTQ+ community, and Stockton invitations to speak at events flooded in, and our story was featured in local and national media. One crisp autumn morning, as we sat at our favorite Cafe, Bailey slid a newspaper across the table. The headline read, "Love Wins, How Two Women Are Changing." Corporate America, I chuckled, shaking my head. "Can you believe this? U.S. changing corporate America." Bailey's eyes twinkled as she signed, "Why not? We're unstoppable together." As I reached for her hand, a shadow fell across our table. I looked up to see Martha, my former colleague, standing there with an uncomfortable expression. "Lydia, dear," she said, her voice strained, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for trying to set you up with all those men. I should have seen." I squeezed Bailey's hand, drawing strength from her presence. "It's okay, Martha. You couldn't have known." Martha's eyes darted between us, a mix of curiosity and something else, was it? Envy in her gaze. "You two just look so happy. I never to thought that two women could find this kind of love." I finished for her, my voice gentle but firm. Martha had the grace to look embarrassed. I suppose I had a lot to learn. We all do. As she walked away, I turned back to Bailey, who was watching the exchange with interest progress. She signed, a small smile playing on her lips. "Baby steps," I agreed, lifting her hand to press a kiss to her knuckles. The next few weeks were a blur of interviews and speaking engagements. We shared our story again and again, watching as understanding dawned in people's eyes. It was exhausting, but exhilarating work. One evening, as we collapsed onto my couch after a particularly grueling day, Bailey's phone buzzed with an alert. Her eyes widened as she read the message, then she thrust the phone into my hands. It was email from a major publishing house expressing interest in our story. They wanted to do a book part memoir, part photo essay, documenting our journey and the broader fight for LGBTQ plus rights in corporate America. Gosh, Bailey, I breathed, "This is huge. Are you sure you want to do this?" She nodded emphatically, her hands flying as she signed. "Our story could help so many people. We have to do it." I felt a surge of love and pride. "Okay," I said, grinning. "Let'n write a book." The project consumed our lives for the next few months. We pored over old photographs, relived painful memories, and celebrated our triumphs. Bailey's images and my words wove together, creating a tapestry of love, struggle, and resilience. As the publication date neared, the pressure began to mount. Conservative groups launched protests, threatening boycotts of the publishing house. Online trolls flooded our social media with hateful messages. As one night, I awoke to find Bailey's side of the bed empty. I found her in the living room, hunched over her laptop, her face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. "Honey," I said softly, "what are you doing?" She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, reading comments. She signed wearily, "So much hate." I gently closed the laptop and pulled her into my arms. "Don't let them get to you. What we're doing is important." Bailey buried her face in my neck, her body shaking with silent sobs. I held her tightly, murmuring words of love and comfort until her tears subsided. As we lay there in the quiet darkness, I whispered, "Maybe we should get away for a while, clear our heads before the book launch." Bailey pulled back, her eyes lighting up. She signed enthusiastically, "The cabin in the mountains." I smiled, remembering the rustic little place she'd inherited from her grandmother. Perfect. Just you, me, and the great outdoors. The next morning, we packed up the car and hit the road, leaving behind the noise and pressure of the city. As we wound our way up into the mountains, felt the tension begin to melt away. The cabin was just as I remembered it, cozy and secluded, nestled among towering pines. We spent our days hiking, taking photographs, and simply being together. In the evenings, we'd curl up by the fireplace, working on final edits for the book. One night, as a storm raged outside, Bailey turned to me with a serious expression. "What if the book fails?" she signed. "What if we've risked everything for nothing?" I took her hands in mine, meeting her gaze steadily. "It won't be for nothing," I said firmly. "Even if it only helps one person feel less alone, it will have been worth it." Bailey's eyes softened, and she leaned in to kiss me. What started as a gentle caress quickly ignited into something more passionate. We made love slowly, tenderly, reaffirm our connection and commitment to each other afterwards. As we lay tangled together, listening to the rain, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. The day before, we were set to return to Stockton. Bailey insisted on one last hike. We treed up to a stunning overlooked the valley spreading out below us in a tapestry of autumn colors. As I stood there drinking in the view, I felt Bailey tap my shoulder. I turned to find her on one knee, holding out a small velvet box. My breath caught in my throat as she signed her movements, deliberate and filled with emotion. Leah Campbell, will you marry me? Tears sprang to my eyes as I nodded, unable to speak. Bailey slipped the ring onto my finger, a simple band inlaid with a strip of photographic film, before pulling me into a kiss that left me dizzy with joy. As we made our way back down the mountain, hand in hand, I felt invincible. We had faced so much together, prejudice, danger, and personal demons, and come out stronger, whatever the future held, whether our book was a success or a failure. I knew that our love would endure. The next morning, as we packed up the car to head back to Stockton, my phone buzzed with a message from our publisher. I took a deep breath before opening it. Bailey's reassuring presence at my side. Are you ready for this? I asked, my finger hovering over the screen. Bailey nodded, her eyes shining with determination and love. Together, we faced whatever news awaited us, ready to take on the world. One story, one image, one heart at a time. The message from our publisher was brief but electrifying. Book pre-orders through the roof. Brace for impact. Bailey and I exchanged a look of mingled excitement and trepidation as we pulled out of the cabin's driveway. The peaceful bubble of our mountain retreat had burst, and we were hurtling back towards the chaos of our public lives. As we descended from the misty heights, my phone began to buzz incessantly. Interviews, talk show requests, and congratulatory messages poured in. By the time we reached the outskirts of Stockton, it felt like the whole world was clamoring for a piece of us. Gosh, I muttered, scrolling through the barrage of notifications. I'm not sure I'm ready for this. Bailey reached over, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. She signed quickly with one hand, keeping her eyes on the road. Together, remember? I smiled, feeling my anxiety ease a little. Together, I agreed. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Our book's silence in translation, A Love Story, hit the shelves with a bang. It seemed like everywhere we saw our faces staring back at us from bookstore windows and magazine covers. The response was overwhelming. Letters and emails flooded in from LGBTQ plus individuals around the world, sharing how our story had touched them, given them hope, or helped them find the courage to come out. One afternoon, as we were preparing for yet another interview, Bailey handed me a letter that made my heart clench. It was from a young translator in rural China who wrote about how our book had helped her accept her own sexuality and find the strength to come out to her traditional family. Oh, Bailey, I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. This is why we did it, isn't it? She nodded, her own eyes shimmering with emotion. One story at a time, she signed, but with the highs came the lows. Conservative groups organized book burnings, and we received our fair share of hate mail and death threats. Security became a constant presence in our lives, a sobering reminder of the risks we'd taken in. Sharing our truth one night after a particularly grueling day of interviews and public appearances, we collapsed onto our couch, emotionally and physically drained. I'm not sure how much more of this I can take, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Bailey looked at me, concern etched on her face. She signed slowly. What do you need? I thought for a moment, then chuckled softly. Honestly, I need a break. I need us, just us. A slow smile spread across Bailey's face. She stood up, pulling me to my feet, and led me to our bedroom. There she gently undressed me, her touch reverent and soothing. We made love, slowly, tenderly, rediscovering each other in the quiet sanctuary of our home. Afterwards, as we lay tangled together in the soft darkness, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This was what mattered, this love, this connection. Everything else was just noise. The next morning we made a decision. We would finish our current round of commitments, but then we take a step back. It was time to focus on us, on our future together. As we began to plan our wedding, I found myself rediscovering the joy that had been overshadowed by the intensity of our public life. We decided on a small, intimate ceremony in the mountains. Surrounded only by our closest friends and family, the day dawned clear and crisp. The autumn leaves a riot of color against the deep blue sky as I stood before a mirror in the cabin adjusting my simple white dress. I heard a soft knock at the door. Come in. I called, expecting my maid of honor. To my surprise, it was Martha, who entered looking uncharacteristically nervous. Lydia, dear, she said, wring her hands. I hope I'm not intruding, but I wanted to speak with you before the ceremony. I turned to face her curiosity, overriding my initial apprehension. What is it, Martha? She took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I wanted to apologize. Truly apologize. I've spent so much of my life judging others, trying to fit everyone into neat little boxes. But you and Bailey, you've shown me what real love looks like. It's beautiful, and I'm honored to be here today. I felt a lump form in my throat as I pulled Martha into a tight hug. Thank you, I whispered. That means more than you know. As we broke apart, both of us dabbing at our eyes and laughing softly, I realized how far we'd all come. It wasn't just Bailey and I who had been transformed. By our journey, we touched lives and changed hearts in ways we never could have imagined. The ceremony itself was simple and perfect. As I walked down the aisle, my eyes locked with BIE. As the rest of the world faded away, her hands moved in a flurry of signs as I approached. You are my heart, my home, my everything. I repeated the signs back to her, my hands shaking slightly with emotion before speaking the words aloud for our guests. You are my heart, my home, my everything. There wasn't a dry eye. As we exchanged rings and sealed our vows with a kiss, the small gathering erupted in cheers and applause, the sound echoing off the mountains around us loud as we danced under the stars, swaying gently to the music. I leaned in close to Bailey's ear. So, Mrs. Campbell Perry, I murmured, what's next for us? Bailey pulled back slightly, her green eyes twinkling with mischief and love. She signed her movements graceful and sure. The world, my love, the whole damn world. I laughed, pulling her in for another kiss as our friends and family celebrated around us as the mountain stood silent witness to our love. I felt a sense of limitless possibility. We had faced down corporate giants, societal prejudices, and our own fears. We had told our story and changed lives, and now bound together in love and marriage, we were ready for whatever adventure came next. As the night wore on and the party began to wind down, Bailey and I slipped away hand in hand. We made our way to the overlook where she had proposed, the valley below, now cloaked in moonlight and mist. Standing there on the precipice of our new life together, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us here, for the love that had sustained us, and for the future that stretched out before us, vast and unknown and utterly beautiful. Bailey turned to me, her face soft in the moonlight, and signed 3 simple words, ready for more. I nodded, my heart full to bursting always. I replied, as long as it's with you. And there, under the vast canopy of stars, we sealed our promise with a kiss, 2 women bound by love and shared purpose, ready to take on whatever challenges and triumphs lay ahead. 5 years have passed since that moonlit night in the mountains, and life has taken Bailey and me on a journey more extraordinary than we could have ever imagined. As also, I sit in our sun-drenched office, surrounded by photographs and stacks of translation manuscripts. I can't help but marvel at how far we've come. Our book, Silence in Translation, a Love Story, became more than just a bestseller. It became a movement. We've traveled the world speaking at conferences, universities, and corporate events, sharing our story and advocating for LGBTQ plus rights in the workplace and beyond. But more than that, we've created a space for others to share their stories. What started as a simple idea, a translation agency that specialized in LGBTQ plus literature and media, has grown into something much bigger. Campbell Perry Translations has become a beacon in the industry, now known not just for our linguistic expertise, but for our commitment to amplifying diverse voices. I smile as I hear the familiar sound of Bailey's footsteps. Coming down the hall, she enters the office, her camera bag slung over her shoulder, her face lighting up as she sees me, even after all these years. My heart still skips a beat when she looks at me, like that guess, what she signs excitedly dropping. Her bag and perching on the edge of my desk, what I asked unable to keep the grin off my face. Her enthusiasm is infectious. Remember that young translator from China? The one who wrote to us after our book came out? I nod, recalling the letter that had moved us both to tears all those years ago. She's here in Stockton and she wants to work with us. My jaw drops. Are you serious? That's incredible. Bailey nods, her eyes shining. She says our story gave her the courage to live her truth. Now she wants to help others do the same. I stand up, pulling Bailey into a tight embrace as we hold each other. I'm overwhelmed by a sense of how beautifully our lives have unfolded. We've faced our share of challenges, the constant scrutiny, the occasional backlash, the delicate balance of public and private life, but through it all, our love has only grown stronger. Later that evening, as we host a small gathering to welcome our new team member, I find myself watching Bailey from across the room. She's animated, her hands flying as she signs, surrounded by a diverse group of young translators and artists. The sight fills me with pride and love. Martha sidles up to me, a glass of wine in hand. You know, she says, her voice warm with affection, I never thought I'd say this, but you to give me hope for the world. I chuckle, touched by her words. We're just living our truth, Martha, and helping others do the same. Well, it's beautiful to see, she replies, giving my arm a squeeze before moving off to mingle. As the party winds down, Bailey and I find ourselves alone on the balcony, looking out over the twinkling lights of Stockton. The city that once felt so small, so limiting, now seems full of possibility. Can you believe how much has changed, I muse. Leaning into her warmth, Bailey shakes her head, a soft smile playing on her lips. She turns to me, her hands moving in a familiar pattern. Every day with you is an adventure. I laugh, for Cone in the line from our wedding vows, even when we're just doing taxes or grocery shopping. She nods emphatically, her eyes twinkling with mischief, especially then as we stand there basking in the quiet moment. I'm struck by a sudden idea. You know, I say slowly, we've done so much to help adults in the LGBTQ+ community. But what about the kids, the ones who are still struggling to find their voice? Bailey's eyebrows raise, intrigued. What do you thinking? What if we started a program, something that combines your photography and my translation skills? We could work with LGBTQ+ youth, helping them tell their stories through words and images. Bailey's face lights up, her hands flying as she builds on the idea. We could publish a book, no, a series of books, translations in multiple languages, exactly. I exclaim, feeling my excitement build. We could reach kids all over the world, show them they're not alone. We spend the next few hours brainstorming our passion and creativity, feeding off each other, just as it did when we first met, as the sun begins to rise, painting the sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold. We finally head to bed, our minds buzzing with possibilities, lying there in the quiet. Dawn, Bailey curled against my side. I'm filled with a profound sense of contentment. We've built a life that's beyond anything I could have dreamed of, a life of love, purpose, and endless possibility. As I drift off to sleep, I think about all the young people out there struggling to find their place in the world. I think about the power of words, of images, of stories told and understood, and I know with absolute certainty that our greatest adventures are still to come. Bailey stirs beside me, her hand finding mine in the soft morning light. She signs sleepily, I love you too, I whisper, pressing a kiss to her forehead, had always and forever. And as we drift off to sleep, two women bound by love and a shared vision, I know that we'll continue to change the world, one story, one image, one heart at a time. Our journey, like our love, is far from over. In fact, it feels like it's only just beginning.